Streaming live via the internet, welcome to ISP Radio, your weekly source for ISP-related news, events, and interviews with industry experts. If you deliver internet via fiber optic, fixed wireless, coax, or any other way, you're in the right place. And now a brief word from our sponsors. Link Technologies Incorporated provides the lowest priced Microtech products in North America, as well as Wade Towers, Mimosa, Cambium, Ubiquity, Nettonics, and a host of other products and services to be your one-stop shop for your ISP needs. Visit www.linktechs.net. That's LINKTECHS.net for more information. TowerCoverage.com, providing online RF coverage maps with website integration. Stop rolling your trucks for every site survey and start doing installations. Visit www.towercoverage.com now. And now we'd like to present our hosts, Steve Repeal and Dennis Burgess. Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Tower Coverage. Another edition of ISP Radio. If I get that right, that'd be helpful. I'm so used to doing Tower Coverage webinars now. Any which rate, we have Stephen online. Stephen, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Excellent.
Welcome to another edition of ISP Radio, and Happy New Year, everyone. Hopefully everyone had a safe and fun New Year's Eve. We're complaining out here because it's cold, but I cannot even compare to what you guys are going through. My uncle I talked to this morning said his grandson is in Minot, North Dakota, where it's 40 below, and he's hating life. He's in the military there. But here in New Mexico, we're complaining because it's cold, because outside right now it's probably about 40 degrees, going up to about, 55, 56. Beautiful day to be out plowing fiber into the ground. We had gotten our new trencher in from Ditch Witch. They were going through it. It's new to me. It's still got 4,000 hours on it, and we put it in the ground yesterday to plow fiber, and we got about 60 feet plowed in, really, really deep, probably about 2 foot down, and then we broke a component on it that we need to weld on. But that's okay, because I've got to wait for line spotters to come in and spot in advance of us so that we don't hit any of their utilities. So it's a nice down day to go work on equipment. But other than that, it's been pretty interesting out here. Over the holidays, I had purchased from Dennis a wireless wire setup from Microtech through LinkTechs. It was $199, and I called up my neighbor and said, "Hey, can you be my guinea pig?" He said, "Sure." So I set it up and put it on my house and put it on his house, probably a little longer than a stone throw away. And when we fired it up, it was at full modulation, a full gig to his house. He was all excited, but then I go, "Well, you've got the fattest pipe on our network, but everything else is slower, so you still get the same speed you get, but it should be better." But anyways, guys, the wireless wire works. It works incredibly well. I'm pleased with it. I can't wait to see their multi-point wireless wire setup that they're coming forth with. That's what's going on in New Mexico, and that's all I got to say other than Happy New Year. Dennis, what's going on in your neck of the woods?
Oh, we're busy. The new year, everybody gets their budgets. And imagine this, everybody wants to spend it. I like that. But it does cause some issues with making sure that we get very good customer service and getting hardware, etc. Speaking of those wireless wires, we have ours still. We have not put it up yet, but we are taking orders. Pre-order. Go to linktechs.net. You can pre-order those. The next batch is set to arrive, I'm assuming, at the end of January. Don't know how many we're going to get, but they are ramping up their production for that. So should be really good. Really good product. Really, the big news that I probably have is really on CBRS. WISPs really came out in force. They actually filed quite a few of the filings that WISPA wished to have, and I'm actually trying to look for those.
Well over 100.
Proceeding. Yeah, it was well over 100. Which is really, really good, because that's just kind of one of those things. If we expect the FCC to listen to us, one of the ways that we have to do that is to actually reply with comments. And it doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't have to be this awesome, well thought out or super well thought out thing. It just has to be something written on your letterhead with your signature with, here's what I think about this. Because that's really what the FCC wants to hear. So we had over 100 filings on that, so that's excellent. We are hopefully going to get more, and I think they're pretty much, I think it's in the middle of March or end of March is I think when they are going to rule possibly on that item. So cross our fingers. Actually, we shouldn't need to, but
that was substantially more than what it filed earlier in the year, correct?
I don't know. I
think I heard about 60 or so WISPs filed comments.
In towercoverage.com, we filed showing our 365 coverages as well as the PEA in our area. Even though we don't run a WISP, we still used the local data that was publicly available. We took a screenshot. Here's your PEA. Here's the local WISPs. And our PEA is absolutely insane. It not only includes St. Louis City, it also includes St. Louis County, Jefferson County, which is the county that we're in. It includes Franklin County, which is the county to the west of us. I mean, these are entire counties. And then there's 4 counties in Illinois that it actually contains. And Whisper, Nathan Stuck, he's over there. We have a number of WISPs up in the Westport and the downtown St. Louis area, and then we also have another large WISP over in Franklin County, and they have, we've actually talked, we've actually done a lot of planning with them, which is really good because we actually sit there and go, okay, hey, we want to have good relations with you. We want to resell off your network. Let's get a collective together and let's focus on each individual areas. That way everybody's good, and they're not planning on coming into our area, we're not planning on going to their area, we're expanding south, they're expanding to their west and south, so it all works out. At any which rate, we have a special guest today.
Exactly. We've got Elizabeth Bowles on. She's not a stranger to ISP radio. She was on a couple of weeks ago, but today she's talking about a new committee that she's the chairperson on. And it's, I imagine, extremely important. It's the FCC's Broadband Advisory Committee. So, Elizabeth, are you there?
Yeah, I am.
So, please tell us about the genesis of this advisory board, how it came about, what role you have in it, and what role our industry may be able to contribute to whatever its path is for the FCC.
Well, so the Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee is also called BDAC, was formed by Chairman Pai of the FCC early 2017, and about roughly 400 people applied for positions, and 28 were chosen. I was one of the people selected to be on, and the committee is comprised of municipalities, academics, a lot of wireline providers, fiber providers, cable providers, also mobile telephone, both small and large. I am the only WISP on the BDAC itself. So even though I'm on the BDAC representing my company, Aristotle, I am, I guess, the voice of the industry on this particular body. The BDAC itself then has 5 working groups under it of varying types. One is removing state and municipal barriers to deployment, model state code, model municipal code, federal siting, and competitive access to broadband infrastructure. And all of these working groups under the BDAC have additional people who were added, and Mark Radabaugh of I can't believe I forgot the name of his company. Anyway, he is the FCC chair for WISPA, was appointed to the Removing State and Municipal Barriers to Broadband Deployment Committee. So there are some other WISPs. Jamie Fink of Mimosa is actually on the BDAC itself with me. So I left out that there are equipment manufacturers on, and Jamie Fink is on the committee. So in and about June, the chairman reached out and asked me to chair the committee, which I've been doing since then. And our next meeting, our last meeting was in November, and our next meeting is in January. The purpose of the body is to recommend policies and procedures for closing the digital divide and easing broadband deployment in America. So it's a small task.
Yeah. Just a small one.
A little teeny thing,
Yeah.
little minor deal. No, but I'm pretty excited about it. I mean, I was very honored to be selected. I was nominated by my senator and 2 of my congressmen, and I was very excited to be selected. I'm really proud to be chaired. I'm honored to be selected to do that, to be the chair. I think it has a lot of promise, and I'm very hopeful. And I'm an idealist, honestly, and maybe even naive in that way, but I really think something good can come out of this. If nothing else, we're having some very good conversations about how these various stakeholders can improve broadband in America. And I personally have gained a great deal of understanding of where CTIA and Comcast versus WISPA and, NTCA and all these people are fighting against each other, like where they agree and where they don't agree, and how the municipalities have significant pain points and their voices sort of get overruled by the provider communities. And it's interesting to watch the dynamics of it. I created I'm just rolling, you may have questions. I asked if I could do this, and I created my own ad hoc working group as chair, which is on rates and fees, because all 5 of these groups started talking about what people should be charging for vertical assets. What should you be charging for access to the right of way, or to trench, or for a pole? And if you're not a CLAC or an eligible telecommunications carrier, you don't necessarily get the benefit of certain regulations that limit what people can charge for poles. And also, if the person who owns the pole isn't fitting to certain categories, they can charge what they want. So every single one of these groups was addressing how you handle rates and fees. And so we have an ad hoc group working on rates and fees as well.
So I actually have a question for you.
Yeah.
So with the recent repeal of net neutrality,
yeah.
Okay, now that the whole net neutrality thing, there was a whole bunch of stuff lobbed in with that. And one of those things was that we were a Title II telecommunications provider. Now, that actually helped us in certain aspects. They gave us pole access rights. It gave us access to right-of-ways, things like that. Now that that is gone, is this something that your committee is working on to try to get us access back to that? Or
sorry.
No, I mean, or are we, there have been a number of people that have deployed in the on telephone poles in the right-of-ways because they were Title II, and now they're not. So do they have to get off? Do they continue on? Can they continue operations? How does that all work?
Well,
didn't mean to give you too much there.
That's a really excellent question, and I'm going to take it in pieces.
Yeah.
As far as BDAC itself, no, that's not currently in our charter. I did have a conversation with Chairman Pai, and I said, we're going to have most of these reports to these 5 working groups completed or mostly completed by January, but this is a 2-year term, and there are things that we'd like to step into following that. And are you thinking that the BDAC will have other things that they need to be addressing? And he said, yes. So it's actually my hope that we'll be able to get into some of these things, spectrum and what does it mean to be an eligible telecommunication provider, and how can you get pole access rights for someone who is not necessarily under Title II. So that's one piece, is not right now in the mission, hopefully something that we will be asked to look at more closely going forward. Corollary to that, though, is one of the groups that I'm very active in is the Model State Code Group. And in the Model State Code Group, we are recommending to states that they make access to poles something that is done for all broadband carriers. And we've created a different name for people who are broadband providers who are not necessarily eligible telecommunications providers under Title II. And so it would be my argument that there are some ways around pole attachment rights at the state level, and also that there's some federal there's some work that could be done at the federal level to expand the pole attachment rights given to ETCs into other groups who are doing similar things. And so I think there will be some coming out of BDAC. Some of this stuff is on. What happens in the working groups is actually confidential, but there's some of this materials already available, and there is a docket number that I will look up for you and get to you by the end of the radio show that people can actually go and read the initial draft reports that were submitted in November. And there's stuff in there that you'll see about the need for pole attachments and the need for access, particularly coming out of the Access to Competitive Infrastructure group and the Model State Code group. The last thing I would say about Title II itself is that check your state laws, because in order to have access to the poles, it's not the Title II designation that gives you that. It's being an eligible telecommunications carrier. So if you are an ETC, there's a lot of things you get, and that is a state designation. So in Arkansas, even though we're not under Title II, Aristotle can still become an ETC because we offer VoIP. If you offer voice over IP, you can become an ETC. Pretty much if you don't offer telephone service at all, you're kind of out of luck on that status. I mean, it is a phone thing, but most states recognize VoIP and treat it the same as other things. And so that would be my end run around not being Title II, would be to say check your local state and see if you can still qualify.
So that would, because presumably in like New Mexico, I'd have to become a CLEC, even though I was Title II. Getting on those poles is next to impossible, even with a majority of the state is served by cooperatives, and they're not willing to let you do anything, and it wasn't part of the rule from Title II. But the local power company here, my provider had to spend maybe $100,000 in trying to get on those poles, and still he's not on those poles. But
yeah.
Anyways, would this ETC designation, if we were to offer VoIP, and it's probably different state to state, but I mean, would we wouldn't necessarily have to become a CLEC then? Because CLECs automatically get access.
Yeah, that's correct. You wouldn't necessarily have to become a CLEC.
Well, that's positive.
Yeah, that is, and we happen to be a CLEC, but even as a CLEC, we're not in Arkansas. We're not automatically an ETC unless we offer phone. You've got to have phone,
right?
Because it's the Telecommunications Act of 1934. It's about phone, which is the biggest problem, right? It's like Title II. It gave us a lot of good things, but it brought in a lot of baggage. And so my argument would be, if we need those good things, let's go to Congress and get those good things, or let's get them at the state level. But the co-ops, they're a problem. I mean, they're one of many problems, but if a co-op is not willing to work with you on their poles, there's no statute anywhere. I mean, they own those. They can do what they want to with them. But a lot of providers find that it's easier to work with the co-ops than it is to work with the pole owners who are not. So it's such a play-by-play thing, which is part of, I think, what BDAC is trying to get into. I mean, part of why BDAC was formed was to dig into those issues and say, well, what is the problem? What is the problem? Why don't the co-ops want you on their poles? Are they afraid you'll interfere with their power lines? Do they think the equipment's too big? And this becomes a little bit far afield. It becomes pretty critical when you start talking about small cells, which is the big mobile industry deal, is small cells all over the place. And my argument is, as long as they don't say a small cell equals mobile, all of that lobbying helps us as WISPs, right? Because our stuff's smaller than their stuff any day of the week. Plus which some of the stuff they're talking about deploying as a small cell is actually our stuff that we're already deploying. So we can win that day. But the problem is that they can't get on the co-op poles either, because they're talking about a total amount of equipment that's the size of a small refrigerator, like a mini fridge, 27 cubic feet. And the co-ops are thinking, that's not small, that's huge. And so we have some definitional issues that are coming out of BDAC where it's like, okay, what is small? When you talk about a small piece of equipment that isn't going to be a burden on the pole, what does that look like? What does that need to be? And how do you, for lack of a better way to put it, cram that down the throat of a pole owner who, for whatever reason, thinks you're going to be injuring their... And also in a lot of those pole owners' minds, they're thinking fiber, right? So they're thinking every single one of my poles stringing a string along. They're not really thinking in terms of, oh, here's this little box. And so that's another thing that BDAC's focused on, is how do you educate about the different types of equipment and what's actually being deployed is not what you think. The burden on the pole is significantly smaller when it's one every 15 poles versus stringing something on every single pole as you go along.
Right, and of course that's a lot less money to the ISP. A friend of mine was going so far as to say, I just want right-of-way access. I'll drop my own pole, and I'll do my own small cell, and I'll microwave link everything together. I'll put my own poles. Just give me the right of way to put the pole in.
Right. Well, and that is what I think is going to come out very strongly out of BDAC. I think you will see those recommendations on the right of way. And the issue there, of course, and what I don't want, and speaking as the chair of the BDAC, not as a WISP, but I really don't want recommendations to come out of BDAC that all of the municipalities are opposed to. I want something that we all like, which means nobody's going to be 100% happy, right? Because the cities and the municipalities, particularly the small towns, they want to be able to control their rights of way. Some communities, they have aesthetic rules, and they want these pretty poles. Like they don't want just a basic old plain pole. They want a decorative pole. What does that even mean, a decorative pole? And what does that cost? So from a provider perspective, you're in town X deploying your poles, like your friend, and then you go to town Y and they're like, no, it's got to be wrought iron. It's got to be black. It's got to be pretty. It's got to have scroll work. And so the price.
Or it's got to be a pine tree.
Right. It's got to be a Frankenpine. It's got to look like this.
Frankenpine, is that what they call them?
Yeah, they stick up. Have you seen those? Like you drive down the highway, suddenly there's a super tall tree.
Yeah.
All over Los Angeles.
Yeah. No, we have them in Arkansas from the cellular companies, some Frankenpines in the parks. They're really funny looking, honestly. They have them in Texas too. But yeah, so varying communities, and so what we would like to see, I think, from a provider community is some kind of standardization of that. But the municipalities on their hand, they don't want everybody and their cousin throwing poles up in their rights of way without any say-so over what happens. And so what we're working through right now, I think, is how do we make sure that deployment is eased and the municipalities are taken care of. Speaking personally, not as chair of the BDAC and not for the BDAC, but just personally, I think the lack of understanding on the part of small municipal governments for what broadband can do for their community and what those barriers are to those communities is one of the reasons that you don't have more broadband penetration in rural America. Because when you look at this one small town we were going into, and the guy who runs the water company, he just said that you're going to weld something to our tank. I was like, no, we're not. We're going to use glue. No, you're going to weld something. No, we're going to use glue. And it didn't really matter how often we told them we were not welding. So 5 years later, that city council reaches out to us and says, please come back. And it's like, well, if I remember correctly, we turned you down before because you were going to weld something. I was like, no, we were never welding anything to your stupid tower. But the guy was gone. It was that one guy. Mm-hmm. We had to deploy a prison. There was one guy on the city council in Wrightsville, Arkansas, didn't like the prison. So he delayed us an entire month because he didn't like the prison. It's like, well, that's great. But meanwhile, the people of Wrightsville don't have internet. So it's very frustrating. But then the municipalities, for their part, they feel kind of besieged, They feel like they're doing the best they can. They're short-staffed. They don't have the money. And they're getting walked over by these leather-shoed people from Washington telling them how they have to run their towns. So,
well, how do you overcome that with the BDAC?
Education. I think that the municipalities have a good voice on many of the committees. They have a good voice on removing state and local barriers. They have a good voice on municipal code. And so they're going to have input into these. The big issue that I think they've raised is that the state model code has no municipalities on it at all. And there are recommendations, you'll see them if you read the draft code. There are recommendations in that code about state preemption of local franchising authority. Because the idea is that you or I would go and get permission from the state. We'd have our state franchise. Then we would go to the local community and say, okay, here's my state franchise. Tell me how to comply with your regulations, as opposed to having to go to every single town and say, give me a franchise.
If you guys can get that through, that would be tremendous in this state, because every individual municipality has its own franchise, and it prevents us from doing a lot of good.
Well, I'm hopeful.
Yeah, and that's really what the BDAC committee is really about. Is they want to get us a common, and I'm not trying to put words into your mouth, Elizabeth, but they want to preempt state and local laws that prohibit access to right-of-ways and hopefully poles, but still give the communities the right to say, hey, you can get on these poles or you can have access to right-of-way, but here's what you need to do federally or by state basis. And that way it's easy. At least that's the goal anyway.
Yeah, I think the goal is I would use the word streamline, and I would be careful of the word preempt, because I don't think it's clear from a legal matter how much preemption authority the FCC has. The BDAC, of course, has none. We're just an advisory body. But correct, what you just said is right. I mean, what the BDAC wants is to say, these are best practices. This is what you ought to be doing. And I would be hopeful that those best practices would then inform the FCC on how to exercise its preemption authority. Because if you have a state that's just flat refusing to play ball, that state is going to fall behind. And if the FCC's goal is to get internet everywhere, broadband everywhere, then they may need to act in particular cases to say, okay, if you're not going to be willing to adopt this model that this independent body of people have said is the model to go by, then yes, we'd like to look at preempting what you're doing. I would hope that there is some output like that what the BDAC's work doesn't just go into a drawer somewhere, and that it actually produces that result, because at the end of the day, that's the problem. Going back to net neutrality, I got interviewed a bunch of times because I don't know if everybody knows, but I testified when I was the legislative chair of WISPA. I testified on net neutrality and the financial impact of Title II, which is substantial. I mean, I think the low estimates were $40,000. Was it a year or a month? Some pretty ridiculous numbers were floating around out there about what it was going to cost. I mean, we expended a lot of money in legal just to be sure we were compliant, just in case. And I could see the pros and cons of it. I mean, I really could. The bright line rules are great. We love them. I love them. No pay prioritization, no throttling, no blocking. We all want that. But small ISPs like WISPs were victims caught in the middle, because we can't tell Netflix to pay us anything, so we're not going to win that fight. And we couldn't tell the ISPs like AT&T or our carriers, our tier 1 providers, not to charge us something. We can't pay more to be in the fast lane. So we were really, from a net neutrality standpoint, we benefited from the bright line rules significantly. But Title II was so dangerous to our industry that I had to testify against it. Well, when this was coming up at the FCC, I got interviewed several times. I got interviewed by Wired Magazine and NBC News on what I thought about net neutrality, and I said the same thing. We have to have the bright line rules. We have to have net neutrality. When you start looking at, but Title II is a bad way to do it. When you start looking at cities, anywhere where there's multiple providers, the consumer has a choice. If Comcast decides to implement throttling, which they've already done, like the day after the ruling, Comcast changes its policy to allow throttling, well, maybe AT&T doesn't throttle, and that becomes a competitive advantage. And I'm sitting here in Little Rock, and it's like, well, you know what, Comcast sucks, so I'm going to go with AT&T, or better yet, Aristotle. I'm going to go with Aristotle because they don't block and they don't throttle. So it's a competitive advantage in a community like that. But when you start getting into rural communities where there is no choice, it becomes particularly critical that we have some way to prevent ISPs from flexing their muscle, because a rural consumer doesn't have anywhere to go. And so it's a little bit off of the BDAC specifically, but I think that a lot of the policies that will come out of BDAC will help rural America in that sense too, because there needs to be some behavioral constraints on ISPs and what they can and can't do where there is not a competitive market. Personally, I'd be in favor of seeing 2 sets of rules if that's where we want to go. If we need to do that now I'm totally off track, but here we go. If the problem with net neutrality for the large providers, the reason that they need to be able to throttle is because they're in urban areas where they don't have enough spectrum or bandwidth and a lot of users, then have one set of rules for that and have a different set of rules for rural America where you're not allowed to block or throttle because there's no competition, and it's basically whoever is there is the monopoly in that small town. So that's it.
One thing you threw out there that I really liked that the BDAC is looking at doing is about the franchise agreement issue.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you guys are including municipalities and the like into this conversation, because what you're going to deal with is fiefdoms.
Yep.
This is my dirt, and I'm not going to let you on, or I will let you get on, but it's going to cost you so much that it's not even worth your while. And getting these people to understand that if there's a statewide franchise agreement that everyone pays into, they'll get a part of it back. Like in the state of New Mexico, I pay a gross receipts to the state, and a small fraction of that comes back to the community. But still, if they followed that same model where a small portion of that money comes back to the local community, it helps them with their, lack of resources you threw out there. But the other thing is that I don't think anyone understands, especially in my neck of the woods, is that, yeah, you can throw a franchise agreement on me. That's fine, and I'll go do what I got to do. But that's just going to make the cost of the internet to the person's home much more expensive. It's not coming out of my profit margin. It cannot.
Well, and that's a really good point, because particularly when you have communities right next to each other, if one of them is playing that game and the other one isn't, then the provider is going to go to the community that's going to be more favorable to them. And in some communities, and I didn't even know this was a thing, but apparently some communities require undergrounding of wireless facilities. I don't even know what that means. I don't even know how you do that.
Yeah. I want to know how you do that.
So, yeah. And when I first saw that, I was like, I'm sorry, what? Have you ever had undergrounding? I'm like, I don't even know what that is. But it really is true, because you get into these little fiefdoms and you get into these communities, and I'm going to give them a huge benefit of the doubt. They just don't know better, and what they're used to is what the cable companies did back 30 years ago in the 70s, and they've got a model, and they don't have a lot of people. And also, I think that they're often overlooked, and I don't think we really think about this so often this way, but municipalities are the biggest monopoly on the planet. They own the town. Literally, they own the town. They make the rules. They own the dirt. They have the rights of ways. They have the tax base. I mean, we went into one town and the guy's like, oh, yeah, we're the water department. I'm so glad you guys are coming in. I'll just give you the water department's mailing list so you can market to it. I mean, they have that level of authority within their little communities. And I'm not trying to take any of it away from them. I mean, local determination is a real thing, and it's important. But at the same time, it can't stand in the way of progress. And there is that balance, and I think we're not in the balance right now.
And that's what LDAP is looking to do, is try to educate for that balance, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I heard a story that a state had written into its constitution or something like that the local ILAC had full access to all right-of-ways in the state with no cost.
What?
And I'm not going to say which state or anything like that. Now, again, I'm not going to sit there and say exactly which one it is, but it was literally written into the state's constitution. That's how long ago some of these operators have been out there. And trust me, I totally understand if I had that opportunity to get that done for me, sure, why not?
It's not the ILACs' fault that they took advantage of a situation.
Yeah.
That's the fault of
to be written into the Constitution, for Pete's sakes. Wow.
Yeah, but I mean, is the BDAC is the recommendations going to try to prevent those types of situations from actually occurring?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I think that the traditional phone providers are very entrenched particularly in smaller communities, because they've been there forever and they're friends with everybody. And that, the way an ILAC gets that written into the Constitution is by being friends of everybody. And so the phone lobby, the traditional copper line phone lobby, has historically been very powerful. I mean, in Arkansas, they call themselves the Rural Arkansas Telephone Service, and they in fact do refer to themselves as the RATs. And so the RATs lobby's pretty powerful. They go in and they get a lot of, they prevent a lot of funding streams. Like if you talk about the Arkansas High Cost Fund, which is Arkansas USF, they freak out. If you even mention it, they freak out because it's their money. That's how they survive. But those same people are preventing others from coming in. So you can't, as a federal body, go to the RATs and say, you don't get to do business the way you've always done business. That's not really within their, it's a free market society. They can do business how they want. But what you can do, right, what you can do is go in and say, we're going to level the playing field. You guys can do business the way you want, but we're also going to let the WISPs come in and the mobile providers come in and the cable people come in and have the same access to the same stuff in the same way so that they can compete with you. And that creates, I think, a healthy and wholesome environment for these communities to get broadband. So I don't know if we signed a memorandum of understanding with the Southeast Arkansas Economic Development District. It's a 10 county area in Southeast Arkansas. And I was driving through there the other day, and there are areas they don't even have cell coverage, like out of service, no service at all. And I would say probably 70% of where I drove, they had 3G. So when you're looking at anything, whether it's CBRS and the PEAs and T-Mobile's recommendation that they only have to cover 40% of a PEA in order to call it covered, everything hurts rural America twice as hard as anywhere else. And when you start getting down into these really rural areas where they don't even have mobile, we need to stop debating whether it's mobile or fixed or whatever. We need to say, look, they're entitled to everything. They should have mobile. They should have fixed. There should be a competitive environment, and we need to create a regulatory regime that encourages us to go down there and to compete. Mobile service is for one thing. It's for traveling around in your car, emergencies, and having that connectivity while you are on the move. A fixed service is for everything else: streaming HD videos, running voice over IP, running your business out of your home, schoolwork. That's why you need a fixed connection. You can't say one or the other and we're done. And so that's one of the things that I'm really happy about with the conversations at BDAC, and what's coming out of it is that we are truly technology neutral. We're trying to create an environment that recognizes that all forms of broadband are necessary, and that all forms of broadband, the USDA has historically prevented grant money and money going into any area that had mobile service of 4 megs. 4 meg mobile service aggregate. So 4 meg prevents you from getting federal funding in a particular area, which is absurd. So first of all, 4 megs is not really enough, and my opinion. And secondarily, mobile's not a substitute for fixed. But that's how the rules have been. So some of the stuff coming out of BDAC is to say, okay, you don't really get to do that. Just because you've got somebody there, you've got to recognize that there's multiple technologies for different purposes, and you need to facilitate the way for all of those technologies to come in. Not that BDAC can tell USDA what to do with their grant money, but I think it provides, once the stuff is done and approved, it provides this body of knowledge, body of recommendations that I would be hopeful other agencies would look at and say, that's a really good point. Because even though they're very competitive with each other, like USDA actually told me one time, I don't really care what the FCC says is broadband. We have our own definition. So I don't think that's the world we want to live in. I think we all want to have an understanding of what broadband is and isn't. It has to include speed and latency and throughput and whether there are caps and all that. All of that has to be part of the definition of broadband. And then once we know what that is, we all need to be applying all the money the same way. So that's another thing that's going to come out of BDAC is eventually we will have, at least in some of the reports, recommendations for what broadband ought to be defined as. And that's going to be kind of interesting to see how that.
There we go.
And across different, not just the FCC, like you said, but the USDA and such.
Yeah.
So I'm actually going to put it up on the screen. I know you guys can't see it, but this is the Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee. It is fcc.gov/broadband-deployment-advisory-committee. And this is pretty much where all the information about the BDAC is, including the approved recommendations, the meeting notes, all that kind of good stuff. For that information, if you're interested in the BDAC committee and would like to, I guess, let me ask this question, Elizabeth. Is there anything that our membership or our viewers can do to help the BDAC?
Yes, absolutely. There is a docket. If you go to that page that Dennis just put up, you will see the docket. All of the reports are there. The final reports that are getting voted on by the BDAC are going to be voted on, I'm getting you the dates, the 23rd and 24th of January. Not all of them, probably 3 out of those 4. We'll be voting on model state codes. We'll be voting on federal siting and competitive access to infrastructure at a minimum. And we will potentially also be voting on regulatory barriers. I don't know about Muni, but we need to, but I would recommend everybody look at those and read them. And if something jumps out at you as a red flag, you should post in that docket. That is the place for public comment. I am hoping, I've recommended to the FCC that we allow time for public comment during the 2-day meeting in January. I asked for a 2-day meeting in January, both because we have a lot to do and also because I want time for public comment. I think it's very important for you to weigh in. WISPs are only a very small fraction of the voice. Like I said, I am the only WISP on that committee, and we have Jamie Fink, who manufactures equipment, and me. And nobody else is carrying the water for fixed wireless on that committee, and it's very important that if something triggers you or flag, because I can't be everywhere, I'm only on 2 working groups, and Mark's on the same one as me, so I don't know that the other groups are getting the benefit of the input from our industry that at least those 2 have gotten. So please go to the docket, read the reports. Something stands out to you, make a comment. That's there for you to comment. The FCC will look at that. I think that they were saying that if they got a lot of comments, they would summarize it for the BDAC members. The BDAC will hear from that. Sorry about the sirens if they're coming through.
It's okay. I guess my question is, I see the approved recommendations dated November 9th, and the model code for states, competitive access to broadband infrastructure. I'm actually going to put that up on everybody's screen so that everybody can see it. And then removing state and local regulatory barriers, and these are both Word documents as well as PDFs. But I do not see the docket number.
You don't? Okay.
Maybe I'm wrong. I don't see anything that says docket.
Okay, let me track it down. I will track it down before the end of, I'll see if I can find it.
Yeah, there's nothing that says docket on that page.
It's 17 something. Helpful, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to make a comment while you're looking. There's probably no one better for our industry to be in the position that you're in, especially the committee chairperson. And my question is, you've been involved in this for a little bit of time, and since the transition from our past president to our current one, are you seeing less regulations flowing from the FCC that are detrimental to small business? As we all know, Title II, lumping me into Title II would have been putting me out of business because I can't afford to hire someone to keep me compliant with all the rules and regs. Are you seeing President Trump's promise to reduce regulation to allow for business to flourish?
Yeah. I would say yes. I mean, the rollback of net neutrality was a piece to that. I mean, the FCC doesn't move quickly. It never has, and it never will. But I think that we're definitely seeing that. That was the point of net neutrality, and what came out of that argument was, that item was that the FCC is asking the Federal Trade Commission to pick up the bright line rules and kind of step up in their anti-competitive area. I think that we will see this 3-2 split in the FCC. It will continue that way. They're pretty not in agreement with each other. I've had some interesting conversations with people at the FCC where I believe that we're going to see more regulatory rollback. I think that their view of how you facilitate broadband is to have fewer regulations and more guidelines, which is, I think, part of what they're hoping to come out of BDAC, which is why I said earlier it would be great if the model state code became something that the FCC could say, look, if y'all are doing this, we're going to leave you alone. And if you're not doing this, then we're going to come in and regulate. Because I think that it's not good for anybody to have overregulation, but there has to be enough regulation to create so that people aren't running amok, because otherwise you will have large providers rolling over small providers all day long. And
there's a happy medium.
Yeah, there's a happy medium. But I think, yes, I think we are seeing that. I think we absolutely are seeing that. And the rollback. So, and I'm going to forward this email. I guess I'm going to forward this to you, Dennis.
Okie dokie.
So I guess that's the best way to get it to you. But yes, I think that this FCC very much understands the import of small business. Chairman Pai family is served by a WISP. It gets said all the time. Even before he appointed me to BDAC and made me the chair of BDAC, he quoted my company and other WISPs in virtually every one of his dissenting opinions. He has a very keen idea. Now O'Reilly, I'm not sure. I'm not as sure. I think that he in CBRS, it's been interesting to see how he has approached that particular proceeding, because he seemed to have really sort of bought in, for lack of a better word, with on T-Mobile's arguments. But that's also moving back, and I think even CBRS could be helpful to us in the end. It's just going to be a matter of I don't know. Hopefully our voices can carry.
There's another issue that the FCC is involved in, and I'm pretty sure they're aware of it, but it really hasn't gotten anywhere, and it's concerns with the schools and library division, E-rate, and all that stuff.
Yes.
We all know that these schools get federal money to provide broadband to their schools, right? That's been going on for 20, 30 plus years.
Yep.
There's a thing that has just, I went to a thing in New Mexico put on by the folks in New Mexico, and they're actually doing something dramatically good. The state of New Mexico is actually helping these school districts if they reach out to them technologically, because the people in these small school districts, if you didn't show up to a meeting, you were called the IT director, and these people don't know anything about IT.
They really don't.
Yes.
But if these people were to reach out to the people at the state helps shepherd them through the process to get the funds and stuff they need.
Right.
One of the things that they've never really addressed is, so schools are open from 9 to 5.
Right.
And the bandwidth is utilized 9 to 5, but from 5 to 9, it just sits there dead. And there's a thing that they were talking about called the homework divide.
Yes.
Where some people, you may not believe this, don't want an internet pipe in their house because it could be considered a sewer pipe into their house. But the idea being that the school extend their network with all their firewall rules and everything to prevent that kind of nonsense going on in the home to the children's home, to let them do their homework, because they can only do their homework at school where there's broadband.
Right.
Is that something that the Deployment Advisory Committee has any recommendations for?
I think that in the preamble of the state model code, we talk about the number of the different types of broadband gaps that exist. Homework gap is one, but there are broadband gaps in urban areas. I mean, you have haves and have-nots in urban areas where one area may be less populated or less wealthy, and so they don't have the same access to broadband as other areas. And I think education is pretty key to all of this. We didn't get as far in to say that E-rate should be extended to the home, because that was not really in our charter or our mission. I will say personally, I think that is the case. And I know in Arkansas, I'm working with a committee called Forward Arkansas, and that's kind of their aim, is to figure out how to extend E-rate or other ways to close the homework divide. And the homework divide is a real thing. So when you look at, so my daughter is in a new school, and the school's Episcopal Collegiate, and it's a private school here in Little Rock, and it's a good school, really good, and it's college preparatory. And I went in and I looked at the curriculum, look at what they're doing, and so much of it is online. I mean, her Big Era history class that she's taking, it's all online. and she has a computer that they gave her when she walked into the classroom. She couldn't do her homework if she didn't have internet at home. So these kids that don't have internet at home, El Dorado, a large oil company located in El Dorado, Arkansas, they did the El Dorado Promise, which is a scholarship for anybody who graduates high school in El Dorado. And part of it was they put broadband everywhere in these children's homes, and they gave out laptops and their school's all online. So as that increasingly becomes the case in the private schools or in those communities where a wealthy donor, or in the school districts like Little Rock School District, a lot of their stuff is online, but they don't provide the laptops. So those kids leave the school, they go home, they can't even go to the McDonald's and get on the Wi-Fi because they don't have a laptop, because the school doesn't have the money to do it unless they're given refurbished computers. And that's a district of something like 25,000 children in the LRSD, much less when you then go to the little town of Greenbrier, Arkansas, where they don't even have any access at all. And so the homework gap is getting extremely large, because once you get online, you have access to Khan Academy, you have access to K through 12, you have access to Big Era History, you have access to science experiments and English, everything that you could possibly want. A little tiny public school in a little tiny town could be just as good as Episcopal Collegiate, because they can get a hold of the same curriculum, except that they don't have broadband.
Right.
And then the kids can't do their homework because they don't have broadband at home. And that was like the whole CETA recommendation, which is for the schools. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they did a recommendation of how much broadband you need per kid, and it was like 10K per kid or 100K per kid. And what they actually found was that in cities like Little Rock, that's way overkill. The kids don't need 100K because they have broadband everywhere. But in small towns where there's virtually nobody, it was nowhere near enough, because all those kids are coming to the school after hours to try to do their homework at night. And they needed much more than 100K per kid. So it's I don't know, it's a very frustrating thing, the schools, because you immediately run into private providers as soon as you start saying extend E-rate or government money to put internet in the home. Then you have all of the major providers jumping up and down and saying that's no, because no.
Well,
right.
I want to point out that, we have actually talked to some districts around the country about this. And with a wireless ISP anyway, we are very much more adept to building a solution for them.
I agree.
For a small community versus a big ILAC or somebody like that covers multiple states, that they cannot provide a local school district with a local solution. And when we talked with them, the exact words were, we want them to go through our firewall, we want them to go through our filters and things like that. And we actually came up with a special rate that allowed them to actually have faster than normal access, faster access than the standard plans, but everything was funneled through basically boxes that the school paid for, that we put on our network, or my customer's network. And what that really did is that now we had this provider that provides area wherever the school is, or in most of the area where the school is. And if somebody wished to pay for access, they can choose to go through the school's network, use the school's bandwidth, because the school pays for bandwidth with that provider, and magically all that trash, all the filtering, etc., comes in play. So it is possible, but it is a complicated issue. And the simplest way I can say is it's going to take small operators to make those solutions, because the big guys, they're not going to do that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that statement. They're not. And we had our governor stand at the Glen Rose School, which is this really hard to serve school near Malvern, Arkansas, and he announced that every single school district in the state has broadband now, thanks to AT&T. And I was like, really? So then I dug in. Wait, every single school district, they're dropping it off at the district NAMs. They're not dropping it off at the individual schools. And so that's not the same thing as saying that every schoolhouse has internet. And I'm with you. I think that the small providers can be huge players in this. And I would like to actually chat with you about that proposal, because Forward Arkansas would be very interested in hearing about that. And I think we could create a model that might be able to be usable in other localities. And that's where I think one of the things that's going to eventually come out of BDAC are some model things that I'm hoping for. Once we get these codes out of the way, there are some roadmaps and some like model franchising agreements and things that I'm hoping will come out that will serve as, here's a model you can use to implement this in your community. And then that will draw in the providers when the cities and municipalities can be educated on ways that they can be creative about getting this done, then they can start looking at the providers who are equally creative. And that's always the WISPs.
Yeah, it is.
Always.
It is.
We're the creative ones.
Yeah, I mean,
come in and solve the unsolvable problem.
Yeah, we in most of our cases, we own the network, so we can actually sit there and we can do whatever we want. And if that means we need to develop a custom solution for a customer or a customer's set of customers, we can do that. Whereas when you're looking at a statewide entity, they're all about how can we make our network the same so that we can lower our costs.
Homogeny.
Right, and not have to worry about all that kind of good stuff. So, well, I think we're about out of time.
Any questions on the chat there, Dennis?
I do not have any questions. But just so everybody knows, this is actually one of our very first videos that was not done live to Facebook, and that is because Facebook does not like streaming with YouTube. However, we have a video recording that will be going on Facebook probably within the hour, so we will have that as well. Just so everybody knows. Also, we actually have some numbers that I actually got. Some people had asked about our viewership. We have over 658 hours of viewership within the past year. So quite a few hours. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, please give us a call, shoot us an email, etc. Steve?
Yeah, I just want to throw out one more thing to Elizabeth. You had mentioned at the beginning that you're an optimist, and you're our our industry's lady on the hill, and you are not naive by any stretch of the imagination. You're a half full lady, and you can't be naive because, for Pete's sakes, you're an attorney. You don't get a JD just by being a ding dong.
Thank you.
We really appreciate all that you're doing for our industry, and we're so pleased to have Ajit Pai, the commissioner, reach out to you and say we want you as the committee chair. That says a lot.
Thank you.
Well, that's all I have. Dennis, you got any parting comments? And how about you, Elizabeth? Any parting comments?
No, thank you very much for having me on. I love doing what I do, and I love sharing the information, so anytime.
And I hope you like being on our show.
I do.
Gotcha. Alrighty. With that said, I guess we're going to wrap up the show. It is flurrying outside, so I know you were sitting there talking that it was cold in your neck of the woods.
Nah, it's going to be 50. Ounce of rain we had was around Balloon Fiesta in October, which is crazy. I can drive up to the crest, which is a 10,000-foot hill right next to my house, and usually by now I'm buried in 3 feet of 4 foot of snow, but there is nothing up there.
That's not good.
Yeah.
No.
All right, guys, we will let everybody off. Everybody take care. Steve, you want to sign us off?
Yeah, we'll talk to you guys in the near future. Putting together more shows, more content for you guys to learn more about what's going on in the industry. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to ISP Radio. We hope you've gained new insights and additional wisdom in our industry as well as your business. Please remember to visit our show sponsors via the links on ispradio.com. If you're interested in becoming a show sponsor, contact us at sales@ispradio.com. Now go out there and push those packets as fast as you can. Good luck and Godspeed.